And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and let's talk about some great commander cards from the Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth set. It's a massive set. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen so many cards from a set before, if you include like the reprints and the alternate arts and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of cards to go through. It's an incredible amount of legendary creatures. It is, in fact, the most amount of legendary creatures we've ever gotten from a set by far. I think there's over 90. I'm not sure exactly how many there are, but it is for sure the most we've ever gotten from a set. First, I will say the reprints from this set are pretty fantastic, okay? And, there's been some criticism about this set for various reasons. Overall, I actually think it's a pretty great commander set. We got a lot of great commanders. The reprints are really fantastic. And what I particularly love about the reprints is, first of all, they chose a lot of great commander staples as reprints. I'm showing you a bunch of them here. I'm not going to go through all the great reprints from this set. There's a ton, and a lot of them have, in fact, I'm pretty sure all of them have different art. And as an art guy, that's what I really love to see with reprints, right? When you're reprinting cards, especially commander staples, I love to see new and different art because that gives me a reason to go get them, right? I already have a bunch of Farhaven Elves, for example. I got Farhaven Elf in a bunch of my decks, and when I see a really cool new art on a Farhaven Elf, that makes me want to go out and grab that Farhaven Elf for my decks, right? The new Notion Thief looks incredible. So, when you see those new interesting arts on cards like Wayfarer's Bauble, that's another one that I saw. It's a card obviously that everyone has in their commander decks. I have it in a bunch, but really cool new art. So it gives me a reason to go out and grab it. And I love the new reprints from this set. Obviously, there's a ton of great ones, but I particularly love that they did different art on a lot of these cards that we've seen a lot before. They also have, as far as the reprints go, they did the swapping of names thing. I don't know if we have a name for it, but where they take that existing card and then they swap the name to that different IP, the Lord of the Rings IP, but it's still like the Ancient Tomb, right? They gave it a different name, Cabal Coffers, but they gave it a different name, stuff like that. So cards that are very much sought after in the Commander format, they did that as well. And again, that's doubly good because now you're reprinting cards that are very much sought after in the Commander format, which makes it a little easier to get your hands on one. But also because you're doing the name swap thing, people that are huge fans of the Lord of the Rings, now I can go get that one, right? I already used that card, but again, now because I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, I can get the Lord of the Rings version of that card. So they did a lot of that as well. There is a ton to talk about here, a ton. I got over 20 cards that I want to talk about, so let's get right to it. I'm going to start out with a pretty interesting one, and there's always going to be a couple lands that I think are going to become more or less commander staples. This is one of them, Shire Terrace. It's a land, taps to add a colorless. So we have a land that is going to be able to go in any deck, which is really important, especially with this ability. Pay 1 and tap, sacrifice Shire Terrace, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Surprisingly, we've never had a card like this in the game of Magic before. There are cards that do something similar, but cost like 2 mana. I think Warped Landscape is one of them. So this only costs 1 mana. Makes it a lot more viable as a commander card. Obviously, this is doing the Evolving Wilds thing. However, Evolving Wilds doesn't have the possibility to tap for mana where this does, right? Like, especially later in a game, I think this would be much better than an Evolving Wilds where it comes into play and I don't have to sacrifice it to go get a land and it comes into play tap. So essentially, I can't use it right away. Here, I can use this right away. Or even on turn 1. I can use this right away, right? If I have Shire Terrace in my opening hand, I can play it and immediately use it to cast my Soul Ring, right? So this certainly, it's not going to blow anyone out of the water, but it certainly is a card that's going to get played in the format a lot for sure. Another very interesting card that I have to give a mention here, Hithlane Rope, 2 mana artifact. Hithlane Rope can't be sacrificed. Pay 1, tap, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. That's incredible. However, the player to your right gains control of Hithlane Rope. Also, pay 2 and tap, draw a card. The player to your right gains control of Hithlane Rope. This is just such a fun, interesting card for Commander, I think. And again, this for me is one of those cards. It's like, okay, they definitely printed this for the Commander format. This might be the most hug card in the history of the game, I think. People used to play Oath of Lieges a lot in Commander. And, it was a little bit of a catch-up ramp option for those white decks, which don't really need it anymore. But in particular, what Oath of Lieges did is it made sure that nobody was ever mana screwed, because that's just not fun, right? In a commander game, it sort of makes the game unfun when one guy is just getting mana screwed and he's having to discard the hand size. You want to play a 4-player game and you want everyone to be playing their deck, right? Unless you're just there to win. Mostly, though, in a casual game, you want 4 people to be interacting with each other, and Hithlane Rope allows everyone to sort of catch up, right? So I need a land because I'm kind of mana screwed, or maybe I just want to put a land into play. I do so, and then I pass it along to the next guy, and that guy, say he's got lots of lands, he doesn't need the lands, he needs the card draw, he can do that, and he passes it along, and so on and so forth. And I just love it for that reason. You could put this in any deck, and you know, obviously it works great in a hug deck, but you could put it in any deck, particularly if you're maybe afraid you don't have enough card draw or you don't have enough ramp or both. It might be a good fit. You'll use it at least once and then it'll maybe eventually come around to you. But it's a fun card because it just makes sure people are not just sitting there doing nothing in a commander game, I think. All right, moving on. And I got a couple sagas in a row here that I think are just mostly good stuff. They could pretty much go in any deck. They're pretty good. Fall of Gil-galad, 1 and a green saga. Chapter 1, Scry 2, which of course is very usable in any deck. Chapter 2, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. Works in a +1/+1 counter theme, but of course you could do that in any deck. It's going to be usable. Chapter 3, until end of turn, target creature you control gains whenever this creature dies, draw 2 cards. Then that creature fights up to 1 target creature. And man, that's pretty good. Like in 1 card that only costs 2 mana, you're getting a Scry 2, you're getting the counters, you're getting the fight, and then also possibly the card draw. You know, if you do it the way you probably should, you pick a creature that is both going to kill your opponent's creature and then die itself, so you get the card draw. So it's removal and card draw, and there's just so much going on here on 1 card. A lot of good stuff. Does it fit particularly in some decks? Probably, but this is a card that you could just go in any deck, I think, and it'll be very resourceful for you. Similarly, Scroll of Isildur 2 and a blue saga. Chapter 1, gain control of up to 1 target artifact for as long as you control Scroll of Isildur. I mean, that's always usable, obviously. And the ring tempts you. And I particularly put this one in here because there's a lot of cards in this set that just say the ring tempts you. And if you use that card in your deck, and there's a possibility I use this card in my Abishon deck because it is fitting the theme of that deck, well, what happens when the ring tempts you if I'm not doing that at all in the deck? And of course, I'm not doing that in that deck. The first stage of the ring tempting you is you're going to choose a ring bearer, and that ring bearer can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. So if I only get that off of this card, and of course I don't have any other ring tempting you in the deck, what's that going to get me? Well, it doesn't get me much, but it gets me that creature can't be blocked by creatures with greater power, which is okay. So there's a lot of cards that people might use from this set that are going to do that one-shot ring tempts you thing that isn't going to really fit with what you're doing, but what you're going to get is that first stage of the ring mechanic, and that's all. And that's not bad. Chapter 2, tap up to 2 target creatures, put a stun counter on each of them. Again, very usable in a lot of decks, and of course, those stun counters mean it's not going to untap during the next untap step. Chapter 3, draw a card for each tapped creature target player controls. Pretty darn good. Again, just good card draw, tapping your opponent's creatures, gaining control of stuff. It's just doing a whole lot of different things, fits in a lot of different themes, or you could just put it in any deck and it's going to be very usable for you. Next up, we have Feasting Hobbit, 1 in a green. Halfling Citizen 2/2. Devour Food 3. Creatures with power less than Feasting Hobbit's power can't block it. And of course, we have a lot of food tribal stuff in this set, a lot of commanders that are doing it, a lot of cards in the 9/9 that are doing that. I picked out this one, and man, food, as I've said before, the food tokens are not particularly good. Pay 2 mana to gain 3 life's not super great in a commander game. They really went all out having ways to use those food tokens for other things. And if you already have a deck, as it happens, that is doing the food token thing, man, did you get a lot of support from this set. And I picked this one as the best. This card's bonkers, okay? I know it doesn't look like much. Again, anything dealing with foods, you're like, that's not that great. The foods aren't that great. This card is absolutely bonkers, okay? Devour Food 3, and as it says here, as this enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice any number of foods. This creature enters the battlefield with 3 times that many +1/+1 counters on it. So if I devour 3 food, that means this guy has 9 +1/+1 counters on it. That means it's an 11/11. An 11/11 for 2 mana, and on top of that, creatures with power less than it can't block it. That means for 2 mana, I have an 11/11 creature that can't be blocked by creatures with power less than 11, which typically, unless you have a Blightsteel Colossus, you're not going to be able to block this guy. This is a 2 mana creature that's going to be enormous that is unblockable. I had to read this a few times. I'm like, am I getting this wrong? No, I think I'm getting it right. Creatures with power less than this guy's power can't block it. This is an auto-include in any deck where you're doing food, right? And it's a fantastic finisher. Even if you're in one of those very, like maybe you're playing the Butterbur deck, if anyone's doing that, here is actually a way to close out a game if you're in a very underwhelming deck like that, because this guy is going to be massive and he's going to be probably unblockable. Great finisher. You know, very specific, and I don't usually like to talk about cards that are super specific, but obviously we got a lot of those food cards in this set, and this to me is the best one. It's incredible. Next up, Doors of Duran, 3 green and a red legendary artifact. Whenever you attack, scry 2. Then you may reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Until your next turn, it gains trample if you control a dwarf, and hexproof if you control an elf. So, you know, this could definitely fit in any dwarf or elf tribal deck for sure. I think dwarf is more likely with the green and red combination. I don't know how many elf tribal decks are doing green and red. There might be some. That to me is an added bonus. You know, just whenever you attack, get to scry 2. That on its own is pretty good. For 5 mana, though, I want a little bit more. And then, of course, you can cheat a creature into play, and the creature's sticking around, right? That creature's not like sacrificing on the end step, like with a sneak attack or something. You're just putting it into play. It has to be tapped and attacking. So if it is a Sakura Tribe Elder, it comes into play, and of course, likely going to get blocked. That's okay. I'll sacrifice and go get a land. If it's an Eternal Witness, I put it into play. Don't really care if it dies because I'm getting something out of my graveyard. If it's a giant creature, now, right? So there are both scenarios there. And this is a card that, you know, there's certain decks where it's going to be really a nice fit, particularly ones where you're looking at the top of your library a lot. But I think it's a card that could probably go in just about any deck that is attacking, because whenever you attack, you get to scry 2. And you may reveal a card from the top of your library. You don't even have to. You can just scry 2 and that's it. If you don't find a good creature or any creature at all, at least you've scried 2, right? Pretty good card. I think it's going to go in quite a few decks. Next up, 2 Greedily Too Deep. 5 black and a red sorcery. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. That creature deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. Pretty expensive card, obviously. 7 mana is a lot, but I think the payoff is worth it here. Later in a game, this can really turn the tides where, you know, whether it's my graveyard or anyone else's, I just look for that big nasty creature in someone's graveyard. I put it into play under my control, and then likely, you know, I mean, if you're choosing the right creature, which of course, you know, this is one of those cards, it's 7 mana. I'm not going to cast it unless I have a good target. I see a giant creature in a graveyard, I go get that. So not only am I getting this giant creature into play, but I'm likely I kill every other creature in play. So this is just a huge swing. Not only do I get the best creature on board, but I've killed everyone else's creatures as well. So it can be a huge game changer late in the game. I think it's a pretty decent board wipe, and for sure is going to see play in the format. Next up, Minas Tirith, and we have a whole cycle of these lands. You know, I don't know if it's a cycle. We certainly got quite a few of these legendary lands, which this is, that are, you know, they're utility lands. They're doing things. This, I think, is probably the best one that's going to see the most play. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary creature. So, you know, it might enter the battlefield tap, might not. Taps to add a white. So you're going to have to put this in a white deck, and probably in a lot of mono white decks, it's a pretty good include. Pay 1 and a white, tap, draw a card. Activate only if you attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn. That's not hard to do. Only 2 mana. Pretty good card draw option on a land. This is going to see a lot of play in the format. It's very easy to slot this into a mono white deck. And then, you know, 2 color, even 3 color, very easy. If you are attacking even a decent amount, it's very easy to have that 2 or more creatures attacking and then tap, draw card. I think this is probably the best land from this set. You know, it might not be the one that sees the most play because it is color specific, but I think it's probably the best land from the set. Next up, Grey Host Reinforcements, 3 and a white, Spirit Soldier, Flying Ward 3, 1/1. When Grey Host Reinforcement enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard, put a number of +1/+1 counters on Grey Host Reinforcements equal to the number of creature cards exiled this way. So this card might not look like a whole lot. Again, I don't know if this is a card people are going to get excited about, but I think this card fits in a ton of decks. And as I get up this list, obviously I'm going to get to the cards that are included in a lot more decks, are less less specific. I don't think this one is very specific. I think it definitely goes in certain decks. Like, for example, if I'm in that Spirit Tribal or Soldier Tribal deck, this seems like a pretty fantastic fit. Flying in Ward 3 is a pretty darn good creature, and of course, it's gonna be bigger. I like the Graveyard Hate. As I say all the time, having Graveyard Hate in your commander deck is an auto-include. So if I'm in a Spirit or Soldier Tribal deck, I'm probably gonna find room for this card. You're going to exile target player's graveyard, which can be really, really good because you're gonna hit that one guy that obviously really needs their graveyard, or maybe you're just gonna hit that one guy. If no one's playing a graveyard deck, you just pick the guy who's probably playing a creature-heavy deck, and someone had just cost a board wipe, so he's got like 6 or 7 creatures in his graveyard, and then I have like a 7/7 flying Ward 3 creature, right? So it's a double whammy. I'm hitting someone's graveyard, but also, even if there's no one who needs the Graveyard Hate, I'm just maybe later in a game creating a giant flying creature that is hard to get off the table. And again, in that Spirit or Soldier Tribal deck, it gets extra good. I think it's a pretty good card, especially in those decks for sure. All right, next up, again, another card that might not be super flashy, but I think it's pretty good in a commander game. Cast into Fire, 1 in a red, instant. Choose one. Cast into Fire deals 1 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures or exile target artifact. And of course, the comparison here is to a Braid. And I love a Braid because I really love modal cards. I mean, I love removal, right? So removal's great, especially modal removal or versatile removal where, okay, my opponent's got an artifact I got to get off the table. I can hit that. And of course, if my opponent has a creature with toughness 3 or less, I want to get off the table, I can do that. And of course, instant speed is always better with your removal. Cast into Fire is essentially a Braid, except first of all, it's exiling that artifact, so that can be a lot better in some situations. Dealing 1 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures might not seem great, but man, that can be really, really good sometimes. This has the possibility to get 2 creatures off the table for 2 mana at instant speed, right? I mean, I'd say it's likely you're going to use the exile target artifact more, but even if there's just 1 creature that has a 1 toughness that I can get off the table, I can use that. And, you know, maybe I'm not getting another creature off the table, but 2 mana, get 1 creature off the table, and instant speed is pretty good too, right? All around, I think it's a pretty versatile, neat card. It's not super flashy, but I certainly think it's going to see play in the format. Next up, Westfold Rider, 1 and a white, human knight, 3/1. Sacrifice Westfold Rider, destroy target artifact or enchantment, activate only as a sorcery. This is a card that, again, not very flashy. Again, it's removal. I always got to mention what I think are the key removal from any given set that comes out. And I think this is a pretty good one. Now, obviously, because you can only activate this as a sorcery, that takes it from, this is a card that you could put in any deck to, knocks it down a little bit because of the fact you can only activate it as sorcery. However, this is a creature that is destroying an artifact or enchantment, which you don't see very often, right? Especially in mono white. So I'm going to go through all the decks that you might want to throw this in. I guess you could put it in any mono white deck because it's removal. Stapled on a creature, which is always good. If you have any sort of recursion deck, it's going to be extra good. If you have any sort of deck like a black-white aristocrats deck where you want to be sacrificing your creature, it's extra good. Any human tribal, it's going to be extra good because of course it's a human, and any knight tribal, it's going to be extra good because it's a knight. If I need removal, right, instead of putting that disenchant or whatever in my deck, maybe I'll put this instead because I'm fitting one of those themes, right? I think it's for sure a usable card in the format. Moving up the list, and again, moving up to the cards that I think are going to see more and more play as I get higher up this list. Delighted Halfling, 1 green mana Halfling Citizen 1/2. Tap, add a colorless. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a legendary spell, and the spell can't be countered. So I don't think I'm telling tales out of school here if I say that this card might be one of the best mana dorks in the format now. A 1 mana mana dork is ideally what you want, right? I play at turn 1, and then on turn 2, I got 3 mana. That's always what you want to be looking for in your mana dorks. Adding colorless isn't great. However, add 1 mana of any color, spend this only to cast a legendary spell, means it's going to be really good at helping you cast your commander, which is likely in most decks going to be the most important thing for you. Any other legendary spell might be good too, but just I can get my commander out when I want to, and I'm not stuck on colors there. And then of course, it can't be countered as well is probably the most important part there, right? If you have that commander in green, particularly that one like a Corval that's really, really powerful that people might want to counter the first time you cast it, this is a great way to stop them from doing so. And I think for that reason alone, this card's going to see a ton of play because there's a whole lot of commanders out there in green that people are going to want to counter. They're going to be waiting with their counter spell for the first time you cast it. And here player, they're not going to be able to hit it. Obviously, Cavern of Souls is a really popular land in the format for that reason. And again, a lot of people will put Cavern of Souls in their deck, choosing their commander's creature type just to cast their commander because they don't want to worry about their commander getting countered. Here's another great way to do it. This for sure is going to see play in the format. Next up, Display of Power. 1 red instant. This spell can't be copied. Copy any number of target instant or sorcery spells. You may choose new targets for the copies. So obviously, we know what decks this is going to go in, right? It's going to go in those instant or sorcery decks. It's going to go in those storm decks and those combo-y decks. You could just copy a instant or sorcery spell, right? Even if it's your opponent's. So for that reason alone, it's a very usable spell, right? My opponent cast a Path to Exile. I'm in that mono red deck. I need to exile a creature, and obviously in a mono red deck, I can't really do that. So now I can copy that instant and choose new targets for the copy. I can just do that and nothing else. For that reason alone, it's pretty good, but obviously you can get into some pretty bonkers situations here with this for sure. And the really funny part is especially when you get into those counter spell wars where, someone casts something and then they want to counter it, and then some other guy counters that, and then, and after everyone, your two opponents have done battling stuff out, you become the decider, right? Where you cast this and now you can copy the original spell, and you can also copy some of those counter spells, and you can really manipulate the outcome with this card, which can be really fun in a commander game where you get to decide which spells get countered and all that kind of stuff, right? Definitely going to see play in the format. I think it's a little niche, but at the same time, probably any mono red deck is going to want this card. So it could see a ton of play in the format for sure. Next up, Stone of Erech, 1 mana, legendary artifact. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. So a 1 mana artifact that does this, great graveyard hate. This doesn't work on you. It's only your opponents. This hoses a lot of strategies. Also though, pay 2 mana and tap, sacrifice Stone of Erech, exile target player's graveyard, draw a card. That's fantastic. And again, colorless card. And in particular, I talk about a lot of times, when you need graveyard hate in your commander deck, as I say all the time, it's an absolute must. This might be one of the best options we have now. Colorless, obviously, so it can go in any deck. And Scavenger Grounds is a card that I used in all of my decks for the longest time. Obviously, because it's a land, it's a lot easier to slot in your deck. You don't have to make room in the 99. Scavenger Grounds hits all graveyards, so if you're in a graveyard strategy, it can be really, really tough. Getting target player's graveyard is extra good, because typically there is that one guy that's doing the graveyard strategy and you want to hose him more than anyone else. And this is going to do that. And then on top of that, you're getting the card draw as well, right? So it replaces itself. Cheap, it's easy to get out. It hoses a lot of graveyard strategies. It's going to see a ton of play in the format for sure. It's going to be a commander staple, without a doubt. Next up, Champions of Minas Tirith. 5 and a white, human soldier 4/6. When Champions of Minas Tirith enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. So we got the monarch mechanic back at the beginning of combat on each of your opponent's turns. If you're the monarch, that opponent may pay X, where X is the number of cards in their hand. If they don't, they can't attack you this combat. So 6 mana is kind of a lot. This card, obviously you could put it in any monarchy deck, like those Queen Marchesa decks. This obviously is a slam dunk in that deck. This, though, might be one of the best pillow fort effects in the entire format. I think a Sphere of Safety, that's one that gets played a lot, but you have to have a lot of enchantments in play. If you're not doing enchantment tribal and you want a fantastic pillow fort effect, this might be the best. And, 6 mana is a lot, but, later in the game is where you really, really want those effects. At the beginning of combat on each of your opponent's turns, so they all have to do this, of course, if you're the monarch, which this is going to give you the monarchy, and also it's going to really, really help you keep the monarchy, because of course they have to deal you combat damage in order to get it from you. They have to pay X, where X is the number of cards in their hand. So if they have 7 cards in their hand, they have to pay 7 mana if they want to attack you. Who's going to do that? That's probably going to be tapping out for most players. Who's going to want to tap out in order to attack you? I say all the time, Ghostly Prison is a phenomenal card in the Commander format because, yeah, they can pay 2 to attack you, but who wants to do that? Right? Just with Smothering Tithe or any of these cards, players don't want to use their mana to do stuff like that. People don't even pay the 1 mana for Heuristic Study. Who's going to pay 5, 6, or even 7 mana in order to attack you? They're not going to. The only time they're going to do that probably is if you're the only opponent left, right? You're the only one left, and now they have to attack you in order to win. Even if they're going to pay the 5, 6, 7 mana, it's still tapping them down in order to attack you. So it's, how are they going to cast their Craterhoof Behemoth, right? How are they going to pay 8 mana for their Craterhoof Behemoth and then another 5, 6, 7 mana to attack you? Seems unlikely. Now, of course, they could have 1 or 2 cards in their hand, but then they're in a bad situation all around. So anyone with a decent amount of cards in their hand is just not going to be attacking you at all. I think this is one of the best Pillow Fort effects we have in the entire format now, for sure. Next up, Bilbos Ring, 3 mana, legendary artifact equipment. As long as it's your turn, equipped creature has hexproof and can't be blocked. Now, of course, the hexproof on your turn is like, I would prefer the hexproof on my opponent's turn. It's okay. Can't be blocked, obviously, is the part that you only want on your turn. So that's pretty fantastic. Whenever equipped creature attacks alone, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Has equip halfling 1 and equip 4. So, this is a tough one where I'm thinking, it's giving you the hexproof only on your turn. Can't be blocked, obviously fits with a lot of decks. Also, the card draw as well. This is a tough one. When I saw it, I was like, okay, this is going to get played in a ton of decks. And then I was like, okay, well, the hexproof is only on your turn. That's not super great. And equip, if you're not playing a halfling, it's equip 4, which is kind of a lot. So it's a tough one. It's for sure is going to see play in the format in any of those decks. In a Voltron deck, maybe, with Voltron decks, you like to attack alone a lot, so you are going to get the card draw every time your commander attacks, which is pretty good. Can't be blocked, obviously, is really good. It's a toughie. How much is this going to see play? It's certainly going to see play. How much? I'm not sure. I don't know if it's going to replace a Whisper Silk Cloak, but it might be an alternative to a card like that. It's certainly going to see play in the format. Hard to say how much, though. Next up, Entish Restoration. 2 and a green instant. Sacrifice a land. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Put them onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, instead search your library for up to 3 basic land cards. Put them onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. So, this is a card that when I first saw it, I was like, oh man, that's incredible. Everyone's going to be playing it. And then I thought about it. I'm like, okay, maybe not. I tried to stifle my excitement a little bit. And I thought about Harrow, which is obviously a card that gets played in the format an absolute ton, which is very comparable because it's doing a very similar thing where you're sacrificing that land. Also 2 and a green instant, a lot of similarities there. However, with Harrow, those lands come into battlefield untapped. Obviously, first off, in a sacrifice land theme like that Gitrog deck or the Lord Windgrace deck or whatever, all those decks for sure are going to use that card. Without a question, they're going to use this card. All the decks that are already using Harrow probably are going to want this card. Is it better than Harrow? I don't know. If you don't have the creature with power 4 or greater, it's not as good as Harrow, but the potential of I have a creature with power 4 or greater, now I get 3 basic lands for the price of 3 mana at instant speed. You have to sacrifice a land, so of course you're up 2. 3 mana up 2 lands is obviously fantastic. And the fact that you are mana fixing here as well is fantastic. First, I was like, okay, this is one of the best ramp cards in the entire format now. And then I thought, okay, hold on. I'm not sure. This is definitely one that I'm like, how much play is this actually going to see? I guess we'll find out. Next up, last March of the Ents. 6 green sorcery. This spell can't be countered. Draw cards equal the greatest toughness among creatures you control. Then put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So for sure, this is going to see play in the format. When you see this card, you're like, okay, this harkens back to the sort of the old days of Commander, the battle cruiser type of Commander that casual Commander always was, where people really liked playing cards like this. 8 mana, of course, is a lot, but this is very much sort of has that Genesis Wave type of feel where you want to cast it for a lot because otherwise it's not going to be great, and you probably want to cast it later in the game. Can't be countered is great. It really sucks when you play an 8 mana spell and someone just counters it with their Swan Song or something for 1 mana. That feels really bad. So the fact that this can't be countered really bumps it up, in my opinion, because then you don't have to worry about tapping out on your turn and someone just counters it. Draw cards equal the greatest toughness among creatures you control. If you're in just a creature heavy deck in general, how much do you want to get off of this? 6 is a minimum for me. I would say 8 mana is a lot. And obviously your commander might dictate where you're going with this. Just like with the Rishkar's Expertise, it's like, okay, I could play that in any creature heavy deck, but I probably want to play it in a deck where I have a big commander so that I can probably guarantee I'm going to get a lot of card draw off of it. The same is true here. I want to get at least 6 card draw off of this and then put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So I'm drawing 6 cards. If I already have some creatures in my hand, that's good. 6 card draw in a creature heavy deck is definitely going to get you a few. Are you going to get some bombs? Maybe, maybe not. Again, just like with the Genesis Wave, maybe I might hit a ton of great cards. maybe I might not do so great. I don't think you're going to whiff here. It seems unlikely. I think I probably would want to cast this if I already had a big creature in my hand. You know, if I have a Woodfall Primus, that's 8 mana. This is 8 mana. So instead of casting Woodfall Primus, I can cast Last March of the Ents, draw a bunch of cards, then just put my Woodfall Primus into play anyway. So, you know, that scenario definitely seems good. It's certainly the scenario where I have an 8 or even 7 mana creature in my hand already. This seems pretty good because I'm essentially getting to cast that creature for free and the card draw on top of it. Certainly this is going to see play in the format for sure. Those big green decks, I think it's going to see play. It's a funny card and I think people are going to like it just for that reason. All right, getting into my top 10, and these are the cards that are definitely going to see a ton of play in the format. And of course, a top list from a set would not be complete without me talking about another mono white card draw effect, because every set has to have one now. Honestly, I think white it's climbing so high up the list for colors that draw cards well. Just did my card draw video, and Esper Sentinel and Archivist of Ogma are 2 cards that if I'm just picking the best card draw options in the entire format, those are going to be probably in the top 10 in the entire format. Now we're getting more, right? So Dawn of a New Age, 1 and a white enchantment. Dawn of a New Age enters the battlefield with a hope counter on it for each creature you control. At the beginning of your end step, remove a hope counter from Dawn of a New Age. If you do, draw a card. Then if Dawn of a New Age has no hope counters on it, sacrifice it and you gain 4 life. You know, again, this is another one of those cards that, oh, we could just put this in any deck, right? I mean, yes, we're helping mono white draw cards, which it obviously doesn't need, but we can just put this in any deck, right? It's only 2 mana. It only is 1 white mana. And I'm not saying this is as good as Esper Sentinel or Archivist of Ogma. I don't think it is. It is contingent. I mean, card draw in white is always contingent. And in fact, card draw in general, I know a lot of people will say about the white card draw, oh, well, it depends on what your opponent's doing. I mean, Rhystic Study depends on what your opponents are doing, right? There's very little card draw in the format that isn't dependent on anything. Rhystic Study relies on your opponents to not pay the 1. Necropotence relies on you to have a lot of life because you have to pay life. So even the most busted card draw options in the entire format are relying on certain things. I just literally played a game with a patron who had a Necropotence and they didn't have a lot of life. So guess what? Their Necropotence, when it came down, they couldn't use it much. And then after they drew a few cards, they couldn't use it at all. Every card is contingent on something for card draw. The really good ones usually are. So this is contingent on obviously you having creatures in play. Playing this on turn 2 is probably not going to be very good, but guess what? You probably don't want to play it on turn 2 because you don't, as I say all the time, really cheap card draw is not super important because you don't want to play it early in the game. I want to play my card draw later in the game when I need to refill my hand. So at the beginning of my end step, so immediately after I play it, I get to remove a counter and draw a card. If someone now wastes their removal spell on this, okay, got a removal spell out of their hand. I don't think they will. Unless I have 10 counters on this, I don't think they will. Even if I only get 2 counters on this thing, I get a card draw, next turn I get another card draw, and then I sacrifice it and gain 4 life. Pretty fantastic. I think this is a card that's going to see a ton of play in the format. I'm looking at the price here. It's already telling me it's a $30 card. Shocking, because every card, as I say all the time, I said the same thing when Smuggler's Share came out. Great, here's another card that is helping white draw cards. It's just going to be super expensive. Again, I'm just regurgitating the same things I say all the time. We're at the point now where I have 2 mono white decks. I draw cards so easily in either of those decks. I don't even need this card. I don't think I'm going to buy it because I don't think I'm only going to play this card just like I would with a Smothering Tithe. I'm only going to play that in a deck where it fits what I'm actually doing, despite the fact that it can go in any deck. Dawn of a New Age, same thing. I would probably only actually purchase this card for a deck where it really fits, which of course is a go wide strategy where it's going to be extra good because white doesn't need the help drawing cards. It just doesn't. Certainly is going to see a lot of play in the format though, without question. That's why it's in my top 10. Next up, Horn of the Mark. Speaking of those go wide strategies, and I already made a video talking about this because I'm like, yep, that's definitely going to see a ton of play in the format. 2 mana, legendary artifact. Whenever 2 or more creatures you control attack a player, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. So again, fantastic card advantage. This isn't actually card draw, of course, but same sort of thing. It's a 2 mana card that is going to be putting a card in your hand every turn. And as people pointed out in that video, I guess I should have mentioned this in the video, you have to attack a player with 2 creatures. So that opponent, I'm attacking with 2 creatures and I get this trigger. However, if I have a whole bunch of creatures in play, I think this scenario is a little less likely. However, you can get 3 triggers off this. If I have 3 opponents and 6 creatures in play, for every player that I attack with 2 creatures, I get the trigger. So if I attack all 3 opponents with 2 creatures each, again, that's not going to happen a lot, but it is a possibility. This will trigger 3 times. So I look at the top 5 cards, put a creature in my hand, then I do it again, then I do it again. So I'm putting 3 cards in to my hand every combat, which of course is incredible. Just doing this the once is pretty good, but the ceiling here is really high as well. And again, colorless card, this is going to see a ton of play in the format. It's going to go to a whole lot of those decks that are doing the go wide attacky theme for sure. Next up, Forge Anew, 2 and a white enchantment. When Forge Anew enters the battlefield, return target equipment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. As long as it's your turn, you may activate equip abilities anytime you could cast an instant. You may pay 0 rather than pay the equip cost for the first equip ability you activate during each of your turns. So obviously all 3 of those abilities are phenomenal in any equipment deck. This is just an auto include in every equipment deck, for which in mono white there's a bunch, obviously in Boros there's a ton, even the Mardu ones, right? It's just an auto include. Again, this is a specific card for just equipment decks, but there's a ton of those in the format, and this is an auto include in all of them because it's not just giving you 1 or even 2, it's giving you 3 great things that you want with your equipment decks. So not much to say other than this is an auto include in every equipment deck that has white. Coming in at number 7, Spiteful Banditry X Red enchantment. And I might have put this a little higher than, what I think as far as how good it is, but it is a red card creating treasures, so that's all you have to say, and it's going to see a lot of play in the format. So it's an enchantment. When Spiteful Banditry enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to each creature. So again, it's doing that Meat Hook Massacre thing where it's an enchantment that is X that is dealing damage. So it's a board wipe on an enchantment, which is very weird. It comes into play, and I've paid 5 mana, so now I'm dealing 3 damage to each creature. Pretty good. X spells that deal damage can be really good because, of course, you can manipulate the X so that you're not killing all your creatures. I always like board wipes that are advantaging me. So if I have a commander that has a 5 toughness, I can pay 6 into this, kill all the smaller creatures, and my commander sticks around, which is nice. The part that's really going to make people go after this card, though, is whenever 1 or more creatures your opponents control die, you create a treasure token. This ability triggers only once each turn. People are going to love that, and they're going to shoehorn into a lot of decks. Now, of course, when I originally cast this card, even if I just cast it for 3 mana and kill 1 creature that my opponents control, I'm going to get a treasure token off of it. It's very limited because, of course, it's 1 or more creatures and it only triggers once each turn. So you're only going to ever get 1 treasure token per turn off of this, right? I'll just say, I think this is a card that people are going to get super, super excited about, and it's going to skyrocket in price right out of the gate. And it might even stay that way. Again, this looks like it's $33 already. This is a card for sure that people are going to make comparisons to, like a Dockside Extortionist or maybe a Smothering Tithe or Meat Hook Massacre. It's Smothering Tithe and Meat Hook Massacre combined. I think that a lot of people are going to make those comparisons. I think that's going a little overboard. For me, again, this is a card that I look at and I go, I'm probably only going to play it in a treasure deck. And again, in red colors, there's a ton of those, right? There's a ton of decks in red that are doing the treasure token theme. So it is going to fit in all those decks. It's good for sure. And obviously, because it is a red card creating treasure tokens, it's going to see a ton of play in the formats. Just for that reason, I just say don't run out and buy this card right away thinking it's going to be the next Dockside Extortionist or Smothering Tithe, because I don't think it's quite there. It is certainly good, no question. All right, moving on to Flowering of the White Tree. White and a white legendary enchantment. Legendary creatures you control get +2/+1 and have ward 1. Non-legendary creatures you control get +1/+1. So again, this is a card that as soon as I saw it, I made a video about it right away, and I talked about it at length. It is, I think, probably the best Anthem effect in the entire format now. And as I mentioned in that video, even if I just want my commander, like you just think about a Voltron strategy, 2 mana, I give my commander +2/+1 and ward 1. That alone is really good. And again, an equipment or an aura, I'm going to lose the aura if my commander dies, and I'm going to have to reattach the equipment. So this is just going to sit on the battlefield, and every single time my commander comes out, it immediately gets +2/+1 and it was ward 1. That alone makes it good. And then on top of that, all my other creatures get the Anthem effect as well. And if they're legendary creatures, they get the good Anthem. If they're non-legendary, they get the okay Anthem. So again, best Anthem in the format, I think. Maybe tell me if there's something better. definitely going to go in a ton of decks for sure. All right, getting into my top 5, Flame of Anor, 1 blue and a red instant. Choose one. If you control a wizard, as you cast this spell, you may choose 2 instead. Target player draws 2 cards, destroy target artifact, or it deals 5 damage to target creature. And as I've already stated in this video, I love removal, especially if it's instant speed, and especially if it is modal. And this is firing on all cylinders. If you are in any Izzet deck at all, this is an auto include. And of course, if you are in a Izzet deck where your commander is a wizard, which there is a ton of those, this is bananas. I think 3 mana instant speed, I can draw 2 cards and destroy an artifact is incredible. 3 mana instant speed, I can destroy an artifact and kill a creature is incredible. 3 mana instant speed, I can draw 2 cards and kill a creature, incredible, right? Even if I just get 1, again, even if I don't control the wizard, 3 mana instant speed, I can destroy a creature, or I can get that artifact off the table, or if I really need to, I can draw 2 cards. I just love this card. It's versatile removal, and then on top of that, it can be card draw as well. Again, if I'm in the blue-red deck that happens to have a lot of wizards, or my commander is a wizard, absolute auto include for sure. A slam dunk for me in Izzet deck, in my opinion. Coming in at number 4, the Battle of Bywater. 1 white sorcery. Destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. Then create a food token for each creature you control. Wow. 3 mana to destroy all the big creatures. And of course, in a lot of decks, again, I just talked about how I like my board wipes to advantage me, and a lot of the white strategies, again, you see Dusk Dawn, cards like that, there's already a lot of those that hate on the big creatures, which in a white deck where I have a lot of small creatures that is advantaging me, this is the best option for that now. Again, Dusk Dawn is one that I use all the time in decks. Slaughter the Strong is another one that I will use a lot in decks. This is probably the best option now. 3 mana, destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. Then you get the food tokens on top of it. So for me, I'm thinking, obviously in that food token deck, it's a slam dunk. And the food tokens aren't super great if you're not taking advantage of them in other ways. But in a lot of strategies, you know, it might be extra good where you don't see it. Like, for example, an artifact theme. Right? If I'm in an artifact theme in mono white or some combination of white, it might be good because I'm creating artifact tokens. You know, maybe I don't necessarily want food tokens, but I am creating artifact tokens, which can be extra good. So for sure, a fantastic board wipe in the format. Coming in at number 3, Mithril Coat, 3 mana legendary artifact equipment, flash, indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, attached to target legendary creature you control, an equipped creature has indestructible, and equip 3. So what can you say about this? Darksteel Plate is in how many decks? It's probably in a lot. Commander staple since forever, and this is just straight up better. Not only is this just straight up better than a Darksteel Plate, so if you're already using Darksteel Plate, this replaces it, and or this is another option, which you might want. Obviously, a lot of people want to be making their commanders indestructible for a variety of reasons. On top of that, though, this is instant speed. I can protect my stuff, which, again, I talk about all the time. You need to protect your stuff in decks, and a lot of decks, like maybe for sure in the mono red decks, maybe mono black, like there's certain colors that don't protect your stuff very well. This is a fantastic option where I can flash it out, and you might want to do this in response to removal. You can just flash it out on your opponent's end step. It comes into play, and then of course it's going to immediately attach to your commander, or I can do it in response to removal. Because if you flash it out, your opponents are like, oh, he's going to attach it to his commander. Now's my chance. And they use their removal spell in response to this entering the battlefield before it attaches to your commander. So you might want to be careful there with that. Still really good. You know, just wait till your opponents are tapped out. Then you flash it in, attach it to your commander. It's indestructible, so it's hard to get rid of, as everyone knows with Darksteel Plate, and it also makes the equipped creature indestructible. Phenomenal. One of the best equipment in the entire format. Again, it's Darksteel Plate, except just better. Not only can I flash it in and use it to protect my commander, but it also cheats the equip cost. So absolute slam dunk in any deck where you're already using Darksteel Plate. And then again, for the people like me, I'm not a big equipment guy. I don't love paying the mana. I got to play my Darksteel Plate, then I got to pay the mana to attach it. It's very mana intensive here. Now I can start doing that because I don't have to pay the equip cost. Fantastic. Obviously, it's going to see a ton of play in the format. Next up, Orcish Bowmasters, 1 and a black, Orc Archer, 1/1, has flash again. And when Orcish Bowmasters enter the battlefield, and whenever an opponent draws a card, except for the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, Orcish Bowmaster deals 1 damage to any target, then amass Orcs 1. This is a card, again, that I had to read over a couple times because I'm like, am I reading this correctly? It seems way too good. This to me feels like a card, again, it's looking like it's already really expensive. This is a card that is, in my opinion, probably going to get played in Modern and other formats a lot because it is doing so much on one card for only 2 mana. You know, 2 mana is sort of like, I think 3 mana is like that cost that you never get above in Modern. 90% of the cards that get played in Modern are like 2 mana or less or 3 mana or less, right? This definitely fits in that category. Just this enters the battlefield and it deals 1 damage to any target, and then you get to create a token, right? So again, getting away from the amass, orcs strategies, or any specific strategies at all. 2 mana, I flash in a creature that deals 1 damage to a creature. I mean, it can be a player, I guess, so it's never going to be a waste, but I can get a creature off the battlefield, and then I create a token on top of that. That's incredible value. That's worth putting in a deck. If I'm in any of the, you know, I'm dealing damage, I'm amassing orcs, any other of those strategies, obviously it gets extra good. But then on top of all that, whenever an opponent draws a card, except the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, it does it again. So how often is that happening in a Commander game? Like constantly, right? An opponent drawing a card except the first one they draw means that Ristic Study or that whatever card draw cards I just mentioned in this video. Whenever this enters the battlefield and whenever an opponent draws a card except the first one they draw on their draw steps, this is going to trigger 50 times in a game if your opponent don't get it off the battlefield. Like, this card just seems insane to me. Every time they do that, you get to deal a damage or amass Orcs 1. And as I talked about with the Sauron commander, which is doing the amass Orcs repeatedly and constantly, you can do this where, okay, I have my Orc army that I am putting counters on every time my opponent draws cards, right? So when someone wheels, you're going to amass Orcs a ton. You're going to get either a giant Orc army or in a sacrifice strategy. Again, this is going to get extra good because every time I create that Orc, I can then sacrifice it to something, some sack outlet that I already have. And then the next time my opponent draws a card, I get another Orc that I can do it again, and I could just repeating it. So either scenario works great here. What can I say? I imagine this is going to be an expensive card that is, because it just fits in so many decks, but it can fit in any deck as well, right? It fits into those two categories where it's really, really good in certain decks, and you can just put it in any deck and it's going to be great. Absolute Commander staple for sure. Probably a staple in other formats as well. So get your copy quick, I guess. But coming in at number 1, a card that got a whole ton of buzz when it first came out. And again, I haven't really talked about the whole flavor thing and the whole, you know, just Lord of the Rings fans in general might be going after a lot of these cards because they're Lord of the Rings fans and they want these cards for their deck. And the One Ring, of course, is going to be for sure one of those cards, but also is just a great card in general in a Commander game. So 4 mana, legendary artifact, has indestructible. That's pretty great to have on any card in a Commander game. When the One Ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. That's pretty good. Just I play it and I don't have to worry about anything for a whole turn cycle. That's pretty nice to have, but mostly people are going to be playing this for the last ability. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring. That's not great. Tap, put a burden counter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring. How good is this? You know, it's tough to evaluate this. You really want to see this in action. And I think a lot of people, you know, those Mana Crypt people out there that just think Mana Crypt goes in every deck because it's just really good and who cares about the life loss. I'm not one of those people. I'm one of those people who is like, keep track of the life you're losing from your Mana Crypt, or keep track of the life you're losing from your Ancient Tomb, and you might find it's costing you a lot of games because it really does add up, you know, in a casual Commander game. The same might be true here. You know, it's tough to evaluate how much life you're going to lose from this. And because it's indestructible, obviously it's hard to get rid of. I think this is an absolute slam dunk in any deck where you can sacrifice artifacts or maybe sacrifice any other kind of permanent, because if it does get out of hand, you can get rid of it. Also a slam dunk if you're in a deck where you can remove counters from stuff for the same reason. Funny enough, though, again, this is the interesting part about this card. It could be extra good in a deck where you can proliferate, where you can put more counters on it, because of course you are drawing cards equal to the number of burden counters on it. So if I can proliferate, and again, if I don't really care that much about my life, and of course in a life gain deck, it's going to be extra good because you don't really care about the damage you're taking. In a proliferate deck, though, it's funny because it's like, okay, well, maybe I can proliferate so I can draw even more cards faster. The flavor here is phenomenal, right? That again is a thing that a lot of people are going to like about this card is it plays into the greed, which of course the One Ring is doing. Flavor-wise, that's fantastic. I want to put counters on it so that I can draw more cards. But the more cards I draw, the more life I lose. I love the greed aspect of it as well. And I'm gonna like when people play this, right? This is not like a Ristic Study where when I see it, I'm like, oh, Ristic Study, roll my eyes. When I see someone play this, I'm gonna be like, okay, there's a card that's probably gonna draw them a lot of cards. And then also it's gonna be doing them a lot of damage. So it's gonna be helping me win the game because it's gonna be killing them faster. You know, that's kind of the funny thing about it. It's just a great commander card all around. And of course, as I say all the time, because it's colorless, can go in any deck, right? And I always bump those colorless cards higher up the list. I think it's probably the card that's going to see the most play in the commander format of these cards. Maybe, again, it looks like it's really, really expensive already, unfortunately. So that might hold it back from seeing more play. Because it is the card that it is, the One Ring, the flavor, the significance of it, all of that, great card draw option, a lot of great things going on. It's for sure going to see a ton of play in the format. It's up there as far as the best card from this set for Commander, but also everything else that plays into it. It's definitely going to see a ton of play in the format. All right, that is it. That is all. Lots to talk about there. Obviously, this set was pretty darn good. I know there was a lot of, there were some bummers right away about certain things that were happening. A lot of people didn't like a lot of the legendary creatures that were coming out. A lot of people didn't like the ring mechanic. I talked about the ring mechanic pretty much not at all in this video. I talked about it briefly. So there's a ton of cards from this set. And I think a lot of people were a little worried about how much that ring mechanic was going to play a role in these cards. I just talked about over 20 cards and only mentioned the ring mechanic once. There's a ton of cards that aren't touching that at all if you're not a big fan of that. And if you're a fan of that, there's also a lot of cards that are dealing with it, obviously. For sure, I think people are going to find some cards that they're going to love from this set. And again, if you're a huge Lord of the Rings fan, even more so, that is the case, right? So let me know what you guys think of my list in the comments below, and let me know what your favorite cards for the 99 from this set are. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.